guys, it's Deborah from Housewife Eclectic here. I'm here today with my husband. I swear he exists. He's here somewhere. There he is.
Present.
I'm here with my husband today. We are here to talk books with you. We're going to talk some of, not necessarily our favorite top 10 all times, but we're talking books that we agree on, which is like a miracle. There's not much we agree on. So Book-wise. We agree on lots. Okay, so give me just a second to get this shared to the groups, and then we will get started. So I'm Deborah. This is my husband, Seth. Why don't you tell him what you like to read typically?
So the books that I'm interested in are mostly classics. Three Musketeers here. This is one of my favorite classics. Great book. And history books. For instance, Winston Churchill's Story of World War II. Not only is it one book, second volume, third volume, fourth, fifth, and sixth. This is a long time reading all of it, but it's very interesting and very good.
How long did it take you to read the whole series?
I think it took about a year and a half. I was reading lots of other books in the process as well, because I could never just read one book at a time. But yeah, it took a long time to get through it.
So, and for me, I'm sorry, I'm focused on you. I'm just trying to get this going here. For me, I am more of a YA reader, which means I love things like Cinder. I don't know if you've read that. So good. And Flame in the Mist is a new one. It just came out this last month, and I adore it. So, that's for me. So you can see, like, we read very different things. We don't typically enjoy the same type of books. Usually he'll say, and come and be like, I read this book, it's so fantastic, you have to read it. And I'm like, what is it? And he's like, oh, it's Shakespeare's, Midsummer Night's Dream, you're gonna love it. And I'm like, I'm good. and he'll be like, you know what, although he has done really well, I've tried to read more of what he likes to read recently, because he read, a couple of years ago, he read like all of my favorites in 1 year. And then I was like the schmuck who hadn't read any of his. So I'm trying to fix that and read it. But these are books that we have both. So what we're going to cover today is books we've both read that we both really liked and would recommend to people. So hang on. My computer is running like molasses today.
And in case you're not familiar, Deborah is quite the voracious reader. She can read books insanely fast. And not only does she read really fast, when she gets caught up in a book, like Goodbye George, see you next Thursday, that's all she does. She gets tunnel vision in those books, which is kind of neat how fast she can pound through a series.
Well, and also, like, for me, I read a lot and I read really fast, which was like, it was a blessing and a curse in college, because I pretty much never went to class because I didn't have to. Like, I could just read the textbook like that, and then, so he used to like make fun of me all the time. Okay, I think I have got it going. I see that there's 56 of you watching this right now. If you want to go ahead and tell us where you're watching from, and we'd love to give you a shout out. Okay, so what do you want to start with? Do you want to start with one of your? We've kind of separated them into two piles of books that we love all the books, but there are books that he loves a little bit more and books that I love a little bit more. So
sure, I'll start. So one of my all-time favorites is Ender's Game. So this is a classic science fiction book, especially targeted at teenagers. Although reading it again as an adult, you get a much different picture of the book than you got as a teenager. As a teenager, you mostly grasp this is a cool story about genius kids who go into space and train to be basically soldiers and fight against this alien invasion. As an adult, you pick up on a lot of the other nuances here, especially having kids. You realize how tragic it is that these kids, their lives are basically ruined because they have to go into space. They have to do all these terrible things, and their brains are basically completely rewired to only think about war. So it's a fascinating book, and like all good science fiction, it makes you really question morals and ethics and what's good, what's really bad. Where do you draw the line?
So I read this. So you read these growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't actually read these until I read it right after our first daughter was born, so about 8 years ago. And so I had a lot more of like that adult experience than I think you did the first time you read them. But I really liked them. I mean, they're very sci-fi. So, if sci-fi is really not your thing, like, I'm kind of on the middle. Like, I'm more of a magic person. So sci-fi is not really my thing, but I still really like these. I felt like they're really accessible even to people who aren't sci-fi.
And the reason she's saying these instead of this book is that there are actually a number of sequels to this and also some prequels now. So it's kind of, the sequels span in two different directions. So one direction spans off of the main character, Cinder himself, and what he does. And then the other spans off his main lieutenant, Bean, and kind of the parallel track. So that's kind of interesting. Then the prequel talks about what led up to the aliens attacking and how they fought off that first invasion.
Well, and, not to spoil anything, but the end of this book there are a lot of twists in the end of this book that I wasn't expecting, and I felt like, I don't know, even though it is fiction, there's a lot of philosophical things that it gets into that I thought were really interesting to talk about, and we had a really good time talking about this book while I read it. So you've read all of them, right?
Right.
So I've just read this one, and then the direct, it's not a sequel, it's like a companion, right? Ender's Shadow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ender's Shadow is a book that it's basically a similar story. It talks about the same things happening on this space station where they're training, but from the perspective of Bean, who's kind of almost a minor character in this book, but you dive more into his background and realize how big of a genius he is. So it's kind of cool to read the same story, but from two different perspectives.
Well, and I love, I don't know, I love kid genius books. I think they're always a lot of fun. So, okay, should I do one of mine?
Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to pull this down so I can see your comments. Hi, Vicky from Melbourne. It's good to see you here. Okay, let's talk. This is probably one a lot of you haven't heard of. Let's talk Alas, Babylon. So this book is about, there is a man whose brother is high up in the military, and he comes to him and he says, it's coming, like Armageddon is coming. It's already been set in motion. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. So he brings him his wife and his child, and he says, take care of them, protect them, stock up on food, it's coming. And it does come, and the bomb drops, and they're basically all isolated from everyone. So it's actually not much of an action-packed book. It's kind of just like, they're like what happens after the bomb drops, and how they survive. And some of the things that I find really interesting is there's things that you don't think of. Like there's a doctor in the book who he eventually gets like beat up by thugs, and they break his glasses, and there's no way to get new glasses. He can't see. So that's not something I'd ever really thought a lot about. And then they talk a lot about how there's a librarian who's like found this whole new like lease on life, because all of a sudden there's no TV or anything else to do, and everyone's reading again. And so all of a sudden the library is this huge fixture in the community. So I don't know, it's a really good one.
Yeah, so I first read this book when I was in junior high. I had a reading class with a really intense teacher who required us to read a ton of books, and we'd get basically extra credit for the tougher books that we would read. And so I was looking for stuff on my parents' bookshelf, and my mom recommended this one. And I wasn't a big fan of my mom's book recommendations growing up. We have very different styles. Actually, as my mom's gotten older, she's gotten more into style books than my wife likes.
She reads a lot more like what we do now.
But growing up, she didn't. But she recommended this one. I was like, fine, I can't think of anything else, so I'll read it. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, if you need motivation to start your food storage, go ahead and read it.
Right.
It'll get you nice and paranoid. But it's a fascinating book of what would happen in that situation.
Well, it's interesting because the main character in the beginning of the book, when his brother tells him to stock up on food, he goes to the grocery store and buys all this meat. And then like the bomb drops, and he's like, what was I thinking? Like, we're going to have to eat all this meat now because I don't have a refrigerator anymore. And the big thing that they wish they had was flour that they don't have. And so, I don't know, it's a good one.
Now, it's an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb? Is that what it was?
Yeah. So, I don't want to, I'm trying to remember, but it pretty much it's basically what happens is, in the beginning, it takes place during like the Cold War, and so in the beginning of the book, you find out that Russia has launched a nuclear bomb at America, and America has launched one back. So basically, they're just taking the world out, and there's nothing that can be done. So,
in today's parallel, I mean, things are kind of crazy in the world geopolitical sphere. Well, there is some threat of nuclear warfare. Probably the bigger threat, where this book would have similar parallels, would be an EMP strike. You know, the EMPs don't have the huge blast radius, vaporized type people, but what it would do is knock out all of our electricity. And you don't think about how much electricity we use until all of your electronic devices are suddenly dead. And then what do you do? And how do you survive?
Even your car, and it's all gone.
Yeah, and think about how many of us are dependent on medications. Suddenly, you don't have access to those medications; they can't be made anymore.
Well, that's one of the main characters in this book. Her mom is an insulin-dependent diabetic, and about a week into this, her mom dies because there's no way to get her insulin anymore. And so, I think it's a really realistic, but also kind of heartwarming version of what would happen in Armageddon.
Armageddon. With a family-friendly twist.
Okay, go ahead and grab one of yours.
All right. So, this nondescript little book here.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Jessica. This nondescript little book here is actually Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It may be one of my most favorite books of all time. I read it every year in October, getting geared up for Halloween. And it gets better every time I read it. So, the Dracula you're probably familiar with in pop culture. He's kind of turned into more this goofy guy that, I want to suck your blood, and has a funny accent. In the book, Dracula is straight up terrifying.
Yeah, he's like full on, like, this is like the original Read with the Lights on book.
Yeah. At the time, this must have just absolutely freaked people out, because it's still freaky today. It's not what you think, though, as you read it. So the first maybe 10% of the book is very intense. You have Jonathan, who goes out to Transylvania, and he actually goes to Count Dracula's castle, and he basically becomes his hostage there. And you realize how creepy Dracula really is and what his plans are. And Jonathan has to escape, and it doesn't go into great detail of how he escapes, but he does. And he kind of goes a little crazy in that process. And then suddenly you flash back to England, where his fiancée is with her friend, and they're talking about their love lives and how they're going to get married and how everything's going to be wonderful. And you go through a long process. So you go from super creepy to this almost romantic style book. And it's kind of jarring.
Very gothic style book.
Yeah. But it's a great jarring moment because everything seems so perfect and peaceful. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly Dracula ends up in England, and mysterious and dangerous things start happening. And it just builds up the suspense. They don't show Dracula very much. You'll just kind of hear about what he's doing. And then when he does get revealed, it's full-on attack mode. And it's a great book. If you've never read it, it's long. It can be difficult to get through just because the writing style is so much of that romantic classic era. But it's wonderful.
I'm not big into like the romantic classic era, and I would say that this is one of my favorites. It really, like, seriously, it's truly creepy. Like, the movies, I don't think, can possibly do it justice. So, it's
Dracula.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite books, guys, and I'm so excited. So, this is the Bulgarian. So, technically, the first book is called Pawn of Prophecy. But there are 5 books in the Bulgarian, and then there's also a follow-up series called the Milorian that also has 5 books in it. And it's about a little boy named Garin, and Garian. That's right. Okay, Garian. And it's been a long time. And
by a long time, she means like a year. She reads them every year.
Guys, I have a problem. I love this series. Well, and like the second I start it, he's always like, goodbye, I'll see you in a week. Because I pound through, if you do like the companion books, there's 13 books in total, and I'll pound through all 13 in a week. And, but basically he's this little farm boy who thinks he's like never going to amount to anything, and he's being raised by his aunt who he thinks is just like a normal person, and then come to find out she's a sorceress. And
he's a sorcerer.
Yeah, and they take him. Something is stolen in the beginning of the book, and it's really important that they get it back. And so she reveals to him that she's a sorceress, and she takes him on a journey, and they join a bunch of other people. I'm struggling to remember their names.
Yeah, the characters that they join up with are fascinating. Each has their own skill set. So like one of them's just this big buff guy, and he likes to do, he's there just to be the muscle. And then there's Silk, who's this kind of clever thief, and he knows a little bit of everything. He can blend into any culture. He meets his grandfather, who's also a sorcerer, but he doesn't realize it. And so it's kind of this coming of age hero's journey. But where the real neat thing of this series is the world that the author has built. Yeah. There's all these different cultures, basically different countries, I guess you will, on this continent, and they travel through each of them. And each of these countries or cultures is modeled after, real life cultures, either historical or modern, but with a twist to make
and
kind of
they
their
each
own.
have kings, and they each have, Laura, are you talking about this one? This is the Bulgarian series. Laura's wondering what it's called. So this is the Bulgarian, and it's got Pawn of Prophecy, Queen of Sorcery, and Magician's Gambit are the 3 books that are in this one volume. So it's got, it's got Eastern and Western hemispheres and all these different, and it's so fascinating, especially once you get into the Malorian. Most of the Bulgaria takes place in that Western hemisphere, and then most of the Malorian takes place in the Eastern hemisphere, and you find out so much more about those people that they weren't as scary or, as you thought they were. So I think it's a good commentary on politics without being political, if that makes sense.
Yep. So I first read that book when I was in junior high. Loved it. It was one of my favorites. I'm also a J.R.R. Tolkien fan, so Lord of the Rings, that defines the genre. But while this isn't as well written or beautiful prose as it's easier to get through it. It gets to the story.
Intense. So I guess the best thing to describe that is he is total Lord of the Rings fan, and I've only read The Fellowship. I think he's hard to get through, and I like him, and I like the story, and I like the story of Lord of the Rings, but I think he's hard to get through. So I don't think that this is all the fantasy and all the fun without being so hard to get through. Yeah. So that's the Bulgarian.
And if you have a teenager, this is a book that they would love. So, and even if, I don't think it's necessarily a boy-specific type book either. I think teenage girls, because there's a girl in there that he meets up with.
is all sorts of awesome.
And she's all sorts of sassy, and she comes into her own and becomes quite the powerful character herself.
So this is a great one. Hi, Sarah. It's good to have you with us. Want to grab one of yours?
All right, I guess I'm up next. So let's do Freakonomics.
This is a fantastic book, guys.
So maybe you've heard of Freakonomics, but you may not have even known it was a book. That's how it was for us. So we first heard about Freakonomics as a movie. I think it's a kind of a documentary style movie. And so we watched it years ago. We loved it. It's so fascinating. And then because of that, I started listening to their podcast. And you can find their podcast. It's been going for years. Just goes wherever you listen to podcasts and just search for Freakonomics. It's great. So the basic premise is there are 2 guys, both named Stephen. One's an economist.
I know, it gets so confusing. I can never remember. I can't ever figure out which Stephen is talking, though.
Yeah. So one's an economist, and he's really quirky and just exactly how you'd picture that. And the other one's a journalist, and he's very personable, and he's the one that kind of tells the story really well. Together, they're a fantastic team. And so the tagline on here is they explore the hidden side of everything. And it really is like that. There's so many things in life that you kind of just take for granted as, it just is that way. But we don't necessarily understand why things are the way they are. And so they delve into a variety of topics that you would never guess about. This book is not about money, believe it or not. You think economics is money. Well, yeah, but this goes into so much more about this.
I think there's a little snippet on the back here, and I think that really exemplifies like what kind of things you'll find in it. It says, which is more dangerous, a gun or a swimming pool? What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? Or how much do parents really matter? So that's like, those are the types of topics that they're going into in this book. And even if you don't have a chance to read the book, I'd look up the podcast. He downloads the podcast, and we listen to it a lot of times when we're on road trips in the car, because they're just fascinating. Like, things you would never think about that are related, or,
Yeah, so like, example of the story in here is how are school teachers and sumo wrestling related? The answer, they both cheat. I know, not to malign school teachers, I used to be a school teacher myself, but I know the high stakes that come with being a school teacher. There's all that testing. And so they found in certain school districts there was a lot of cheating going on in various ways that the cheating was happening. And then same with sumo wrestling. That you may not know much about sumo wrestling other than there's big guys and diaper-looking things, and they battle it out. But apparently there's this intense culture there, and a lot of the matches are rigged. And it goes in, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it goes into why these things are rigged and why school teachers start cheating. And it may be ways that you can overcome that. So it's a fascinating book. It's a page turner. It's really easy to read. Like I said, I'm not big into economics, but this is fascinating.
You can see it was required. You see the U sticker. It was required reading in his sister's college class. Yep. So that's kind of where. Let me grab. I'm going to grab this one. So we're going to talk Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. So I first read Jane Eyre. I had to read it in high school for a class, and I was surprised how much I loved it. It's still one of my very favorite books. I feel like it's pretty easy to read. It's not it's too flowery or too descriptive or anything like that. So I begged him when we were first married. I used to beg him to read this book, and it took him a while, but he finally got through it. And I mean, I don't think he'd add it to his top 10, but it's definitely one I think you enjoyed, right?
Yeah, so I was a little nervous when she wanted me to read it. To me, it just screamed of Pride and Prejudice, and I know I'm going to offend everybody, but I hate Pride and Prejudice. Why? Because the main character's not that good. Like, she's kind of a punk. Jane Eyre is not. Jane Eyre is virtuous, and she's noble, and just everything bad happens to her.
She's a good person.
But she doesn't deserve any of it, and she still maintains her goodness throughout. And so that's the part that you're just like, man, you really like this person. You want the good things to happen to her. And as every new bad thing happens, you're just like, she's got to pull through this.
Well, and you're like, could anything else worse happen to this character? Like, I mean, her whole life is really hard. But I think she's one of those characters that is purely good, and you really are rooting for them, even though, everything is going wrong.
And in terms of classic literature, I mean, I read a lot of classic literature. This goes into some interesting things. It shows the time period in England, which is interesting. But it also shows, the gender dynamics and, where a woman's place is at the time and what a man's place is supposed to be and how those dynamics interact and how the class system was so ingrained. And where she falls in it, because she's not of the upper class, and so there's a lot of dynamics.
Well, and I think something that's so wonderful is like, I don't know necessarily that I would call it. I don't even know the word for it, but she is lower class and of lower class, and she is a woman, and she doesn't let that stop her. She decides she's going to figure out something to do with her life, even though she really has no prospects or anything like that, and she becomes a governess and a teacher. And so it's really, I think, good to see, someone who doesn't have a lot of prospects in their life try and, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So, and then the other part of this is Wuthering Heights, which I don't know if you've read it. It's also another one of my favorites. This is like the opposite of Jane Eyre, where the characters are really, truly awful people. Like,
they deserve every bad
thing. They deserve every bad thing that happens to them, and they cause the bad things that happen to them. And then, they kind of get their redemption towards the end, but not really through themselves. It's kind of an interesting, take on that Gothic literature.
But yeah, in a lot of ways, this really is the opposite. Not just because they're bad and Jane Eyre is good, but they're both basically about how your environment affects you and the choices you have to make. Because in Wuthering Heights, there's some bad environmental factors that are in play. And rather than use them to make them good people and push through it, they use it to justify all the bad things that they do. And so you have the opposite of Jane, who won't let those things affect her. She's still going to maintain her goodness.
So yeah, there really are like opposites, like the two big characters in each book. Like one is Jane Eyre is good, and she's going to do everything she can to be good. And then in Wuthering Heights, you've got characters that, bad things happen, and they, use that as an excuse to be worse. So. All right. So my next one, it's kind of a weird one. It's not so much a book as it is a short story, but this is my favorite short story ever. So it's The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. And there's a few other stories in here which are okay. But Henry Sugar is a great story. It's a Roald Dahl book, so, it's kind of got that quirkiness that he's known for. But the basic premise of the story is this guy, he learns this special technique where he can see through cards. So he can, what a huge advantage when you go gambling. So what do you think he does? He goes gambling and he figures out how to win. Lots and lots of money.
But it doesn't turn out quite how he's expecting, and he learns some things about himself in the process. But it just makes you fascinated, and it makes you start to wonder, wow, what's the untapped power of the human mind? You hear we only use a certain percentage of our brain. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. But the idea that we could do more with our mind if we could really apply ourselves is fascinating. So this book captured my imagination as a kid, and I still enjoy it today. Well,
and I didn't read it until after we were married. So I was an adult when I read it, and I still really, really enjoyed it. And it's one that I've read with our kids, and they just think it's hilarious. Sarah says her favorite book by Oscar Lewis is La Vida. I don't think I've ever heard of that. Have you?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it, though.
I'd love to know what you think of it, Sarah. I'd love to know why it's your favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and grab The Hunger Games, getting a little more YA here. Sometimes I go a little more classic with him, and sometimes I pull him a little more YA with me. I don't know. Have you met someone who didn't like the Hunger Games? Besides the ending?
Not the first one. I've met people who didn't like the sequels to it.
I could see that. You know, so the story is, you know, Katniss Everdeen is thrown into the arena, and basically last child standing is the winner, and they have to murder the other children. So it's, you know,
heartwarming.
It's a heartwarming book. Recommend it to everyone. You know, so it is intense. I know particularly a lot of people really dislike the ending. I'm not going to get too much into that. I know Seth here really loved the ending because he felt like it was realistic of what would happen to those type of people after being in that type of situation. You know, and after having long talks with him about the ending, I have felt more okay with it. So, but this one, what would you say about it? Who would you recommend it to?
I mean, if you've got teenagers, it's a great book for them to read. Although, you know, depending on the age and their maturity level, you might want to have some conversations about it. But, you know, it's a great opportunity to bring up the concept of morals and ethics. And should we let society determine what's good and bad? I mean, what's the line between reality TV and this extreme version of reality TV? I know, I mean, there's quite a world of difference. But what would the steps be that would take us from what reality TV is today to the Hunger Games?
Yeah.
How degenerate does society have to become for that to happen, and could it happen? So it's a great book. It's fun to read. It's easy to read.
It's also fast paced.
Yeah.
So if you have a reluctant reader, I think this is probably a great one to give to your reluctant reader. I don't know, what age would you let? We have two kids. We have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. At what age would you let our 8-year-old read it?
It really depends on their maturity level. I'd say, you know, I probably wouldn't do it before junior high or middle school, but at that point, you know, check their maturity level. Make sure you've read it first to know what you think of it, and then
12 would probably be my lower limit there.
Cool. So speaking of young adult literature, you know, that's not really my favorite genre, but I do like some books in there. So one of my favorites actually is I Am Number 4. So I first found out about this, actually, the movie we just saw a preview for. I think it was with Netflix back when you would order the DVDs.
Oh, yeah.
Made Melon.
We haven't done that in so long.
Yeah. And so we did that, and we watched it, and, you know, it's not the greatest movie. There's just explosions everywhere, but the basic premise of it was fascinating to me, which is there's good aliens and there's bad aliens, and they're both here on Earth. The good aliens, there's only a select number of them, and they're teenagers, and they have special powers, kind of X-Men style. Although X-Men generally have one power, these guys have multiple powers.
Called legacies.
And they develop over time, and they kind of stumble upon them. And the bad guys are these Mogadorians, and they come and they attack, and these guys have to figure out how to survive. So it's a fascinating.
Well, and one of the biggest things about it, so there are 9 in the beginning. There are 9 kids, and they can only be killed in order. So he's number 4. And 1, 2, and 3 have been killed, and he's next. So that's the big crux of the book right there. They're really good. Like, they're really action packed. They're really fast moving. They're really fun.
The There she's talking about is it's a series as well. It's beyond this first book.
So my problem with this series though is I felt like for like the first, how many books are there? 8 or so? For like the first. Most of the books, first 5 or so, I felt like I could recommend them to anybody. I mean, I got my 14-year-old sister reading them. I felt good about that and everything like that. And then these last few books, his language has gotten a little coarser and things like that. So that's just something to be aware of if you are gonna hand it to your teenager. That eventually the language does get a little bit coarser.
It does, but I mean at the same time, I hate to be like this, but your kids are hearing worse at school. They are.
That's true.
So. The story is fascinating in and of itself, and it's not the best written book. Like, the quality of the writing is a little weak, but the storytelling is great. It just moves along quickly. The characters you really start to care about. You're invested in them. You want to keep reading. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this series is between the books are sets of novellas, so little short stories, and they fill in the gaps and give you a lot of background. Now, you could read the whole series without the novellas, and you do just fine.
But I think you would miss.
But you missed some
so
extra
much of
details.
the extra little things that make the series so great. I totally lost my train of thought there. It's a good book.
So yeah, give I Am Number 4 and its sequels a read.
And if you've seen the movie,
don't judge it.
Throw that out of your head and then try the book. Okay, I'm gonna grab Holes. This is another one that I actually didn't read as a kid. I didn't read until I married him, and he was like, "What the heck? Every kid has read this book." So Stanley Yelnatz's family is cursed, and he's accused of stealing a very expensive pair of sneakers, and he's sent to a Camp Green Lake. And at Camp Green Lake, they have to dig a hole every single day. And it kind of seems like the warden is looking for something, but they're not sure what. So, short read, funny read, and really delightful. It's one that my 8-year-old has read and really liked. So but I really liked it. I read it when I think I was 22, and I really liked it then too. So
it's a really fun book. The movie adaptation of it's pretty good too, and I think they're pretty closely aligned. Some differences, but yeah, it's a great book.
So Sarah wants to know where we do most of our reading, and also if we like audiobooks.
So where do I?
So I think she means what format. Do we read books, or do we read
So
ebooks?
if it's a young adult type literature or a recent book, yeah, we usually get the books themselves and read them.
So also for me, I actually read for a company, which is super, super, super fun. So most of mine are actual hardcover books because I'm reading ARCs, which means an advanced reader copy. So they haven't actually been published yet, but I'm reading them to help this company decide which books they're going to do. So
as far as the books I usually read on my device. So I use the Kindle app on my tablet, and classics are free, basically.
Yeah, that's what's so nice about
them. And that's kind of the draw to me. I'm cheap. So I like the idea that I can just go search for these books and read them. And the more classics I read, the more I love them, and the more I realize there's a reason they're classics. And a lot of them really hold up well today. So
yeah, we've talked about a few, right? We've talked about Dracula and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, which I think if you go and look on the Kindle app are all free right now.
Yep.
So
speaking of classics, then here's one. Ignore the little sticker on the cover, but The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a great book by Alexandre Dumas, who's one of my favorite authors. He's a French author, fantastic storyteller. You really have to understand him really well. You have to have a bit of an understanding of French history, which, since I like history, I do have an understanding of that. So if you're not really familiar with it, you may end up spending a little bit of time doing some background research. Wikipedia can help you out there.
Or you can be a normal human being and not do any research and still love this book like me.
Yeah. But the movies...
But you'll probably like it more if you do his route.
The movie version of this is fantastic. But it's an entirely different story than the book. Now, the basic premise is the same. A guy is wronged. He's sent to prison. He escapes. He finds a fortune. And he takes revenge. So that's the basic format. But exactly how it all goes down is different.
Very different. And some of the characters are different. And...
yeah.
But they're
both equally good. Just
this is one of
spheres.
The only books where I've ever been like, they totally screwed up the story and it's still amazing. So the movie's really good and the book's really good, but they're very different stories.
And as you can see, this is a hefty book. It's going to take you a while to read it. It is free on the Kindle app, and you can probably find it on other places online for free since it's in the open domain. But definitely worth your time reading. I'd say, I already talked about Three Musketeers is another one by Dumas. This Three Musketeers is probably I like it more than Count of Monte Cristo because Three Musketeers reads like an action movie. This one's a little tougher to read through, and it's heavier too. He's after revenge,
yeah,
and he's wronged, and so it's so tough. But it makes you really wonder, what would you do if you were wronged in that way? How would you react? You suddenly have a fortune. How would you?
You can take your revenge on these people, would you? So the very first time I read this, I read it in high school, and they had us read the abridged version. So it was a little easier to get through, and I felt like it shared the story really well too. So I've read both versions, and I loved both versions. So if you're a little bit worried about the length, I think you could go abridged on this one and be okay. But if you're not worried about the length, I would go for the full version because it's got some extra nuances in there that you're going to miss with the abridged. Okay, let's go to my beloved Agatha Christie. So Agatha Christie, I've read every single thing she's written, guys. I read it all in high school. That was like my go-to from like junior high to high school, everything. So I have 3 favorites, and I've gotten him to read 2 of my 3 favorites. So this one is, And Then There Were None, which is also known as 10 Little Indians. So it's basically 10 people are put on an island, and they all have... It's been a while since I've read.
They have some shady backgrounds.
Yeah,
They've been accused of some bad things, so you wouldn't be surprised if any of them were the murderers. But you don't know who's the murderer. And basically they're there, and one by one they start getting knocked off themselves. And so you start trying to wonder, okay, well, who's left?
Who's
who could do it?
And is there someone else on the island? What's going on? So there's 10 people, and they're stranded on an island, and they one by one die. And so at the very end, when the last person dies, you're sitting there going, who the heck killed him? Like, and I think one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite murder mysteries is because I seriously sat there and went, I don't know who the murderer is. Like, usually, you know, I'm pretty good. Usually 2/3 through the book, I can tell you who the murderer was. And so this last one is one of the first ones that I didn't know who the murderer was until the confession note at the end. So I thought, excellent read.
Yeah, that's good. You know, and as she said, she's read all the Agatha Christie books. I've never read them. Like, you know, I've always heard of Agatha Christie. I'm not a huge mystery person. I like them.
I love mysteries.
But you know, it's just not something I seek after. They're more of like I've got a few hours, let's kill, let's read a mystery book. I want to read something a little more in depth. But she finally did convince me, and I figured if I'm going to read Agatha Christie, I'm going to read her biggest classic, which is Murder on the Orient Express. Now, you've probably heard of it. Maybe you've seen film adaptations of it. I believe a new one's coming out soon.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And I think it has a pretty star-studded cast.
Exciting.
But the book is phenomenal. So you don't, you know, it's part of a series in a loose sense with the detective. But you don't have to know anything else about it to really get into it.
Yeah, this one is Perot. Mm-hmm. So this is one of her most favorite detectives. The one we were just talking about actually doesn't have a detective in it.
Yeah. So Perot, he's a fascinating detective. He's kind of quirky himself. But they're on this train, and there's a murder committed, and then they're stranded in the snowstorm. So there's really no way for somebody to have gotten on or to come off the train. So they figure it has to be someone on the train. And there's a whole slew of colorful characters with various backgrounds, with various motivations potentially for why they may have wanted to commit the crime. And so just as you think you figured out who the person is, suddenly they're cleared, and then it's a different person you're throwing doubt on. So I'm not going to ruin anything for you, but it's a great read.
It is. It's a fantastic read. It's also one of those that I think has you guessing more towards the end as to who the murderer is, and then I think the murderer is kind of a surprise. Yep. And it's one of also those books where like the murder happens, and you're like, most of the books I'm like, you know, you dirty rotten murderer, and this one you're always like, yeah, okay, I might have been involved too, you know, like that kind of thing. So
now the one thing I think my one criticism of this book is she doesn't drop many clues for you to really figure it out, and in the end when she reveals the murder, you're kind of like, well, you held all those close to your chest. Like, how could you have
I could never have figured that one out. Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't think all her books are like that. There are a lot where I've been like, yeah, it's that person, you know. So, but definitely, I think Murder on the Orient Express and then There Were None are two of her very best works. And then I also personally love one he hasn't read yet. Is called N or M, which is kind of more of like a spy novel in World War I. So that one's really fun too.
You're up.
Oh, I'm up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys. I have a goal in life. And that, so I do a lot of these book lives with Marissa from Reagan Ramblings. And I also, you know, do a lot of book posts. And one of my goals in life is to find a way to put Harry Potter on every single one of them. Because it should be on every single one of them. So you can see my, you know, Harry Potter shirt. See my Bellatrix and Ron earrings today. It's kind of it's more than a little of an obsession. We watched a documentary last night called Mudbloods about people who play real life Quidditch. Sweet. And I'm not that crazy, okay? I just love her. Okay, the girl with the dorm room covered in stuff, I'm not that crazy.
So we both started reading Harry Potter when we were teenagers. Back before anybody really knew about Harry Potter, we kind of were in the new, I guess you could say, kind of getting those first British imports over here.
Well, I remember the day my mom brought them to me. She brought me, when I was introduced to them, I was 12, and the first 3 books were out. And she came to pick me up from junior high, and we had kind of just found out we were moving, and I felt like life was over, and, you know, because when you're 12 and you move, life is over. And she found them at a store, and she brought all 3 of them to me, and, you know, handed them to me a stack, and she said, I think these sound, people say these are really good. I think these will help you. And I was like, okay. And then ever since that, I waited in midnight for book 4, 5, 6, and 7. And book 7, guys, it's the best birthday present I ever had. It came out on my birthday. And I told him, we were married at the time, and I told him all I wanted for my birthday is we were going to go at midnight, get the book, and he was going to leave me alone.
Which was easy to do because we waited in line, got the book, and I immediately had to go drive down to the airport, and I had to go on a business trip. So didn't get a chance to read it till after she was done, which, you know, would have been a matter of hours only anyway. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about Harry Potter. I feel like everybody's read it. But if for some reason your spouse hasn't read it, encourage them to do it because it's something you guys can bond over really easily.
So my 8th 8-year-old is really obsessed with Harry Potter. But for her, she's a really voracious reader, but she's still at the point where she likes pictures every now and then. So for her, we have the first 2 are out. We've picked up the first 2 illustrated versions of Harry Potter, and they're beautifully done, and she's really enjoyed those ones. There's not a ton of pictures in them, but there's, every 10 or 20 pages, there's a picture, and I think that's helped bring the story to life for her, and she's really like that, so.
All right, next up, it's actually going to be 2 books at the same time, but I'm going to include them at the same time because they go together. So, first one's called Complications, and the second one's called Better, and they're by Atul Gawande. I hope I said his name right. So he's a surgeon, and
Hey, at least you tried. I wouldn't have even tried. I'd be like, they're by this guy.
So he's a surgeon, and he talks about his experience as a surgeon, and I believe.
So these are nonfiction books.
Mm-hmm. And I believe he picks up like right at the end of his residency. So he's new, he's fresh, and he has fresh eyes on the whole industry. And he talks about the complications that happen in the medical field. Lots of things. He talks about the alcoholism that is actually kind of rampant in doctors. He talks about the weird sensation of cutting into somebody. And
one of my very favorite things, I actually can't remember which book he talks about it in, but one of my very favorite things that he talks about is how doctors are sued and why people sue doctors. And a lot of times, he'll talk about doctors' bedside manners, and there's one point where, he'll say people don't want to sue a nice person. If they have a medical malpractice, they'll come in and they'll say, I want to sue this guy. And, the lawyer will say, well, actually, it was this doctor's fault. It was the anesthesiologist's fault. And they'll be like, oh, but he was so nice, I don't want to sue him. So, he talks a lot about bedside manner, and he also talks about an interesting case study is it in Canada where there's that surgery center in Canada?
Oh, the hernia center.
And all they do is one type of surgery, and they're amazing at it because that's all they do over and over and over again.
And that process of doing only one thing and doing it really well has actually lowered the costs immensely of healthcare, or at least that type of surgery. So, healthcare right now has become very politicized, and he kind of hints at things, although he talks more about just the problems as they are, not necessarily he has the answers of how they should be fixed, which is nice to have that perspective on things. They can be tough to read at times. He gets very graphic in his descriptions.
There were a couple of times
where
where
kind of sick.
I had to put him down because I was a little nauseated.
But they're page turners for sure. It's just interesting. I work in the healthcare industry. I don't directly work with patients. So to me, this is very interesting stuff. But even if you're not in the healthcare industry, I wasn't at the time when I started these. It's just you need to know what healthcare industry is really like and realize it's way more complex than politicians or pretty much anybody would really want to believe. It's not a simple answer.
Well, you had to read this one in college for a class, right? Is that what you had to do? Some sort of review?
I don't think I had to. I think it was it was recommended reading for a class. And
well, he when he first started reading this, it was seriously like every 5 minutes he'd be like, hey, guess what? Hey, guess what? And I'd be like, finally I was just like, let me read the book. Because, you want to talk about, well, and I felt the same way, when I was reading the book like a week later, I would be like, so let's talk about this part now. Because it's really fascinating.
So yeah, Complications is about the complications that happen in the medical industry. And then Better is about how do we make healthcare better? Again, not going into the political side of it, but just generally, what can doctors do? What can we do as a society? What individual responsibilities do we have?
And this one, I think it talks about. Does it talk about? They were trying to figure out how to help newborns be healthier right after birth, and it talks about how just giving them ratings, giving them APGAR scores, all of a sudden the newborns were all healthier because the doctors were competing against each other for these scores.
Yep. Which is interesting because they'll compete for that, but they won't wash their hands.
Yeah.
And they've tried everything for doctors to get them to wash their hands, and actually probably the most effective thing was shaming them. If you create some sort of a wall of shame, it actually had better results. So it's complex. We're humans, and what's more human than our health? And so yeah, give them a read. Complications and Better, definite reads.
So, and if you want, I've linked up into the description, I've linked to a blog post where we talked about a lot of these. So you can find the descriptions, find the title, the author, and then also a link to Amazon if you need to see what the cover looks like, that kind of thing. So Laura says she likes the James Patterson Alex Cross series. Have you read anything by James Patterson?
I don't think so. I've been tempted to. So good recommendation.
You know what's crazy is right up where we live in this little teeny town, and the library is like a bajillion minutes away. I know it's really not. It's, you know, a lot of times it's on his way to work though, so sometimes if I have library books, I'll, you know, have him drop them off or pick them up or, you know, stuff like that. But it's quite a ways away for us. So sometimes, you know, people will comment on how many books we have and things like that. I think it's kind of a natural thing that happens when the library is so stinking far away. And
keep telling yourself
and
that.
you have a book obsession. Okay, so let's talk Percy Jackson.
Yeah.
So Percy Jackson's definitely middle grade. He finds out he's a demigod. His dad is
He's not Maui though.
He's not Maui. You're welcome. He's the son of Poseidon, and his mom is just, you know, a normal human. And basically monsters come after him, that kind of thing. So he goes to Camp Half-Blood. And then Zeus's lightning bolt in the first one is stolen, and he is accused of it. So he's trying to go through and clear his name, basically, but he didn't steal the lightning bolt.
Yeah, so it's a 5-book series. They're fun to read. Like, they're not complicated. This is not world-class literature, let's be honest.
No.
But if you're in for a fun read and a series that you can read with your kids and they'll enjoy, Percy Jackson's fantastic. And the cool thing is, you get educated about Greek mythology just kind of naturally because you're going through, and you don't have to be big on Greek mythology to understand it. It helps, but he does a good enough job explaining the mythology.
Well, and that's what I think has been so wonderful is that, like, you don't have to. Sorry, I totally cut you off there. You don't have to understand. He is really good at teaching you the mythology and things like that. And also, I don't know. I'm really big into. My daughter's a big reader. She loves to read, but she also likes to be read too. And I'm big into, if I'm going to read to her, I want it to be something we're both going to enjoy. And I think Percy Jackson really fits that bill. You know, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, that kind of thing. They're books that your kids are going to be enjoyed being read to, but you're also going to enjoy the story too. So I think that's a big thing for me.
All right. So, totally different style of book, Anthem by Ayn Rand. So, you may know stuff about Ayn Rand, you may not. So, Ayn Rand's a philosopher. She's also a writer. And so, she's written some really big, famous books, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. She's my favorite author. Her philosophy of objectivism is really intriguing. Whether or not you agree with the philosophy or not, because I don't know if I 100% buy into it. But this book is a great read. So if you're intimidated by reading Fountainhead, if you weren't required to at some point, or the Atlas Shrugged, I still recommend reading them. This is a great place to start. So this is really, at its root, a dystopian novel. And it takes place, you know, society has collapsed and all individuality has been taken away. People no longer have names. And to drive home the point, she actually writes this without the use of any personal pronouns. So let's say she wanted to have the character say, I want to go to the store. The character would say, we want to go to the store, because there is no I. Well, they're all just collected as that way.
That was like, so this book, this is the only one I've read by Ayn Rand, is Anthem, and I really recommend it. It's a great dystopian read, but it took me halfway through the book to realize that there weren't two of them. There was just one guy, like, because he kept saying we, and so finally when it dawned on me, I was like, this changes everything. Yeah. Like, you know, that it's just one person saying we.
Yeah, so, you know, it's kind of Giver-esque in a certain way, and I'm sure that Giver was lifted to some extent off of this, since this was written before. But, you know, they're given assignments, like that's their job. Whether or not they're good at it, whether or not they like it, doesn't matter. That's their job. And the main character rejects that. He feels like he can be so much more. And he starts sneaking off and trying different things, and he starts experimenting. He basically starts doing science. And he becomes intrigued by it. And then he meets this woman that he falls in love with. And, you know, she brings out the best in him. And they I'm not going to ruin it all for you, but, you know, it's about that discovery of the individual. And there is inherent value with the individual.
Well, and I definitely think, you know, there's been a lot of talk about Ayn Rand's philosophies lately and how, you know, a lot of people don't agree with them. And even if you don't agree with any of her philosophies, this is still just a great, fantastic dystopian read.
Yeah, so if you like The Giver, this is a better version
of The Giver. Did you like The Giver?
It was okay. I know everybody literally likes it. To me, it was just average, but I think it's because I like this book more.
Oh, okay. So this is The Westing Game. This is also another great one that I think you would also really enjoy as you read to your kids. So 16 people are gathered together for the reading of this man's will, and his name is Samuel Westing. That's why it's The Westing Game. So he's kind of this eccentric, crazy millionaire, He's chosen, like, these 16 people are all strangers, aren't they? I think they're all strangers. And they have to go through this game to win the money. So it's like all, so they're all these different people from all different walks of life, and they have to play this game to win his fortune after his death.
So, I mean, it's a mystery, but it's definitely written for a middle schooler in mind. And that's actually when I first read this book. And I've loved it ever since. It's a great book. It's a quick read. It's fun. It's easy. It's a good way to get kids into the genre if you're wanting to introduce them.
It's so funny. You and I read such opposite books as kids. This is also when I didn't read till I was an adult. There were a lot of books that, right after we got married, he'd be like, it's like the Westing game. And I'd be like, the what? And he'd be like, okay, we're headed to the library, so there were, quite a few that, Western game holes and other things like that I didn't read until I was an adult, and I really enjoyed this. So, he first read it as a kid and loved it. I first read it as an adult and loved it. So.
All right. So, this looks like a kid's book, but it's this really pretty animated version I got for Christmas this year, A Christmas Carol. It's classic. I know it's May. We shouldn't be talking about Christmas, but
we talk about Christmas Carol every month, though.
I love A Christmas Carol. It's a great book. I have to read it every year in December to get in the holiday spirit, and nothing puts me into the Christmas spirit better than this book. Maybe it's because I have some Scrooge-like tendencies myself, and sometimes I want to just kind of shut myself off from the world, and helps remind me that
I'm laughing because he is a little bit of a Scrooge.
That you do need to reach out, and there is that warmth and humanity that needs to be there. So Christmas Carol is a quick read. It's one that you've probably seen all the movie versions, but may have never actually read. If you haven't, read it. It's free. You can get it.
Guys, it really is. I read it for the first time, I think, right when we were first married, because this was another thing that he was like, this is it's not Christmas until you've read A Christmas Carol. And I don't know, there's something about it that just opens your spirit and makes you ready for Christmas, makes you feel the true meaning of Christmas. And I don't know, it's just, and I've seen so many of the versions, but special shout out for my favorites, and Muppets and Mickey, and also I love the Patrick Stewart version. But so it's when we like, he reads it every year. I try and join in with him at least every other year or so, and then we always seem to watch. How many versions of A Christmas Carol have we watched by the time Christmas comes around? So there are some pretty awful ones too. There are some where I'm like, did you read the book before you wrote this? Because I don't think you did.
All right. So another one, I think I've worn down her stack, so I'll finish off mine. Catch Me If You Can. Again, another book that has been adapted to a movie, and actually,
the movie was pretty good.
We first heard about this by watching the movie. So it's the one with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. Great movie. It's a lot of fun. But the book is even better. So that's what inspired me to read the book. And the movie, the whole time I'm watching, like, this is ridiculous. This is God.
He's a teenager.
There's no way
in his 20s.
Yeah. You read the book puts the movie to shame. Like, the movie's incredible and incredulous. The book's even more so. Like, it takes it to the next level. All the things that he was able to get away with, and you're just like, no way. And your other thought is, there's no way that this could happen today. And part of that is because of this guy, Frank Abagnale, I can't remember how you say his name. But after he was arrested, spoiler alert, he gets caught, and serves some time, part of his deal that he makes is he's going to help out the U.S. government and help them figure out how to beat people like him. So he helps the government, and afterwards he goes and helps the banks and makes a good chunk of money there.
He's a lot of the good reason why it's so hard to counterfeit checks and things like, because that's how he makes a lot of his money when he first starts, is he writes bad checks. And he writes he makes the check be from somewhere across the country and then writes it over here, so that by the time they get there, it's been a while, and they've lost track of him and stuff like that. So he's now, as he's a real life person, and now he has helped banks and the government and stuff like that spot counterfeiters and things like that. So
fun read. It's depressing when he does get caught, and you hear the conditions, and especially at the prison in France that he was in. Yeah,
France was kind of awful. Swiss, like, seriously, if you ever get caught, you want to be in a Swiss prison.
I think it was Sweden that he had the best one. It was like basically Sweden. A resort.
I thought it was Swiss prison.
But yeah, it's fascinating. Give it a read.
So, and it's fun. There's a lot there. He tricks more people in the movie. He tricks Pan Am, and being a pilot, and he tricks it.
poses as a doctor and is a lawyer, but he actually really did become a lawyer.
He passed the bar. He did. But they leave out a few things. Like in the book, you also find out he tricked BYU into letting him be a sociology professor for a while, which is particularly funny to us because that's where our parents graduated college from. But.
Yep. And I guess you could talk more about this one, but...
So, you know, I feel like this is such a good one to end on because, you know, is there anything better than To Kill a Mockingbird? I know you don't love it as much as I do. And I also think that To Go Set a Watchman ruins things that, no, you liked it?
I liked it. So, To Kill a Mockingbird, you probably read it in school, and you maybe liked it or didn't like it, but, you know, it stands as a classic about American culture and value of human life and racial discrimination. And so the next book, To Go Set a Watchman, it's kind of a sequel to it, but actually it was really more of her early version of what this was going to be. It was never really meant to be fully released. It changes.
I think she kind of would have been upset to know that it was released after her death, don't you think?
Yeah. So Atticus Finch, you know, he's the stalwart. He's the one that defends. But in Go Set a Watchman, he's not so much that way. But so the basic premise of the sequel to this is Scout, who's the main character in this book, she's much older. She's in her 20s. She's gone off to college. And she comes back, and everything that she thought she believed in and was home is not really that way anymore. And I guess that kind of resonated with me because I think we all experience that. We leave home and then we come back and we start to go, wow, did I really behave this way? Believe all these things, good or bad? But it's never the same when you go back home again.
It's definitely more coming of age than... Well, I think that, you know, everybody goes through that. They come home and... Well, and I think you see your parents through different lights after you have kids. And, you know, I think one of the... Not that this really has anything to do with To Kill a Mockingbird. But I think one of the hardest things for me was, like, after becoming a parent and, you know, starting to discipline our daughter, like, realizing that every punishment my parents ever gave me was really arbitrary. It was just something they pulled out of the air. Like, you know, because I know that's how it is with, you know, I'll be like, you need to vacuum the stairs. That'll teach you your lesson. And it's always like, yeah, the stairs needed vacuuming. So, I don't know. But, so that's a great one. I think they're all great. Is there, if you could pick a favorite out of the 20 books we've shared, what would you pick?
Oh, favorite? Well, I'd probably have to pick Dracula just because I read it so much. I've probably read that book more than any other. But
I'd probably pick the Bulgarian because it's a fun series, and that is also, I think, a great series for a reluctant reader. If you have a reader that, you know, is like, I don't want to read, I hate reading, you know, I think that would be a great one to help get them back into reading. So.
Well, that's all we have for you today.
So thanks for tuning in with us. So I'm Gemma from Housewife Eclectic. You can go ahead and go up into the description and you find a link to my page up there. I'm live every Monday, either here on Spacious and Laser Beams or on Mama Loves Food. And then on Fridays, I'm also live at 11:30, which is 1:30 Eastern, on my page, Housewife Eclectic. And we do crafts and books and other fun things. So go ahead and scroll up and like my page so you can get, you can find us when we're live. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you later.
See ya.